All right. Well, let's get to it. You're disturbing things, my friend. The inflation
Am I
nation.
really?
You are making waves. This is. We certainly. I'm not sure if this is Buttergate. We call this Inflation Gate. I'm not sure it's that, but recently came out, and you and I talked a bit about this in the run up to it. But there's an article published in conjunction, I guess, or published by the Toronto Star that looked at what Stats Canada looks at in terms of reports in terms of food inflation and other data. So take us through it, take us through the issues, and let's get started.
Yeah, I mean, going back to Buttergate, I mean, the common denominator for all of these things is basically how the Canadian public is served, what we offer to the Canadian public. It's always been, I've always had a problem when I know consumers are the
Mm-hmm.
victims essentially, and so that was the case with Buttergate, as far as I'm concerned. With the CPI, with the Consumer Price Index, I think we've talked about this before. I've always been concerned about the accuracy of the index, and in particular in relation to food inflation. I don't look at other components at all, not even e-commerce. I just look at food, and I've
Sure,
always
sure.
felt that something was off. And I've actually testified before Senate a couple of times the last few years, telling senators that I've been concerned about the CPI. And actually, I did use some Nelson IQ data to show them how off the index was related to meat, produce, different products. And I mean, prices are so volatile these days, it's hard to keep track. And I think there's some of that going on with the CPI. But
Mm.
in recent months, I mean, we've been approached by this great organization called BetterCart, and Melanie Morrison, who's joining us today, which is great.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
she blew me away. I mean, her model is amazing. They basically data mine millions and millions of data set every single week, which is 200 times more than stats can. I mean, it's just a
Mm.
powerful tool that they have. So immediately when I saw what they were doing, I thought, ooh, this is very good. And so we started accumulating data and basically reported to the game public a few months ago how different the CPI is to the data being mined by BetterCart. And that
So right away, you saw that there was a discrepancy in the data, and you're, of course, quite experienced at understanding, or at least trying to project food inflation, because you put it in Canada's food price report each year, right? That's a long, big project with multiple universities, so it's not like this is a casual observation for you. I mean, you crunch through this data and try to forecast a year ahead, right?
Absolutely. So so we're actually working currently on our 12th edition for Canada's Food Price Report. We're actually meeting on Friday, all four universities. So that would be the University of Guelph, the University of Saskatchewan, and UBC as well. So we're getting together on Friday to forecast what's going to happen in 2022.
Right.
And we've in the past, at the very beginning, we actually were using the CPI StatsCan's data, but we immediately saw something was off. So we started to use, get this, the St. Louis Federal Reserve's data. That's right. We
What?
actually were using American data to forecast Canadian prices. So, and I've always wondered what's going on here. And this wonderful reporter, Paul Webster from the Toronto Star, worked on an article, investigated for about 2 months on this issue, was able to interview StatsCan only to really uh, pinpoint what exactly the problem was. And again, I actually do believe that StatsCan is filled with highly competent people, and they mean well. It's a great organization. It has a great reputation.
Yep.
But data capture, I've always felt that was the problem. And in order to capture data properly, you need strong partnerships with industry. And so right now, StatsCan, for the first time, I think, has publicly acknowledged that they do have they do face some challenges when collecting data. They deal with three grocers. We don't know who they are, but they are
Yeah.
dealing with three grocers. They're trying to sign on more, but they
Now
can't.
it makes sense that we don't know who they are, right? They're
Oh, absolutely.
one of their paramount things is confidentiality, or
Yep.
else for all the right reasons.
And
And it's interesting.
that's why understanding brands and banners and all that, and trying to correlate
Yeah.
inflation with what is actually going on, it's very difficult to do when you have
Yeah.
access to only 100,000 data sets a month, which may sound a lot, but it's very small when you carry thousands and thousands of products in a store. So we've always argued that the data set, the scope of the data set needs to be broadened way more to get a better sense of what's actually happening with the food inflation rate here in Canada.
Well, and interestingly, Stats Canada, which actually put out this subsequent to what was it on the 18th about how they do the food price index. It's an interesting
Yeah.
read, basically defending what they do. Second largest, design with accordance standards and so forth and so on. And I echo my experience with the folks at Stats Canada has been uniformly, positive. We have a disagreement, and I have a disagreement with them on, again, the same thing, how they and what data they collect in the e-commerce side of the equation. To
Yeah,
their
your concern
defense,
is with e-commerce, eh?
yeah, because and the data they collect, I think, is genuinely accurate, but only gives part of a picture. So it's a whole different discussion. They only basically capture what Canadians, are sold in Canada versus what they're buying, and they don't even include Amazon and Wayfair in e-commerce because they consider them warehouses. So it's a classification issue, not unlike what we're talking about here. What always interested me about how they figured out food prices is something we've talked about a couple of times: the whole shrinkflation issue,
Yes,
where
that's
how do
right.
you understand, if the price remains the same but the package size goes down? I'm like, I wonder how they factor that into their model, because that's just, I'm no data scientist, but that to me is off the top one of those obvious, how do they figure that out? um
Yeah,
so
no,
what did we
absolutely.
so what
It,
got
it,
this reporter from the Toronto Star intrigued in this? Was it something that you said, or something that it just kind of, this has been percolating along for a while? Like, what
well,
kicked that investigation off?
essentially saw a report on comparing the CPI data with BetterCart, and he called his editor and said, "Listen, I think he's on to something. Let's
Yeah.
write up, but let's investigate further." And that's what he did. And I thought he did a pretty fantastic job. He called all the grocers. He called processors as well. He also obviously had an interview with StatsCan, and they were very defensive. I mean, they basically claimed that our approach was unfair and inaccurate. But I don't understand why they would say that, because we actually were coming forward with some clear data,
Mm.
and our raw data is out there. I mean, basically we whereas StatsCan's raw data is not available. Even if you FOIP up StatsCan, they're not going to tell you which brand they're looking at. They can't. They're not
Mm.
allowed to. And so that's really the problem here, transparency. And now I actually learned this morning that BetterCart has been asked to meet with StatsCan, which is really great news. I think StatsCan's approach has changed. Uh, for the last 5 years, they were very, very close and unwilling to talk, to exchange. Our goal is to help them. We want to help StatsCan, because at the end of the day, the CPI influences everyone,
Everything.
everything.
And it influences tremendously business decisions, right? So
Of
from the
course,
retailer's perspective, they're going to look and say, how's inflation? Should I, am I worried about consumption? Anyway, it impacts a lot of stuff. And I agree. I've had great discussions with Stats Canada, full and fulsome discussions. We don't always come to an agreement. They don't always see it our way or my way, but they certainly have engaged in the discussion. And they did some amazing work on cannabis, by the way. Separate
they
thing with their
did.
Stats Cannabis. Very
They did.
innovative, right? And
But
that actually highlights an issue, right? Because they would say one of the issues, and they tried to resolve this, and maybe you can speak to it in the food. They tried to resolve it in e-commerce by saying, listen, our problem is people don't like filling out surveys, like people like businesses. So let's go to where the data is. I wonder if we can anonymously tap into credit card data and understand at the transaction level And we thought, well, that's an interesting idea. Now they floated that balloon, and it was shot down very quickly by privacy concerns.
Yeah.
They were gonna hash out the data. That would have given them a very much more fulsome look. So they were thinking about it, about different ways, and I think cheers to that, because that's what we were asking for as a retail industry. Is like, we do not have an indication in this country, like unlike the States, we have no idea basically what percentage of sales. We can build some models. Is that the same issue? Your challenge is, their challenge is who's filling out the data and providing them the data. Now, that's the one thing that jumped out at me about the article. Like, and it was this, I think it was, you said this oligopic nature. I thought that would be good. In other words, if, there's 5 grocers that account for most of the grocery sales in this country by percentage, right? What?
Yep.
80, 70%, right? Wouldn't that mean you'd get pristine data if you were capturing the data or asking for the right data, because you're capturing so much? You don't have to go to 100 people. You can go to, by going to 3, don't you get like 60% of the data? Isn't that good?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, first of all, you need people to scan the data, and we both know what's going on with the labor market. That's one thing. I mean, you also have to think about grocers on a tight margin. I mean, that's extra. That's more responsibilities, and they don't really benefit commercially from reporting scan data. The USDA resolved that issue a long time ago. They basically created a consumer panel. They've actually hired, quote unquote, 120,000 households. Consumers are actually scanning the data for the USDA. So you can look it up. You could go on their website, and they have the scanning of all the data. The raw data is done by households. So you kind of remove the industry, and you get to what people are seeing out there. Now, of course, it's not necessarily error free, but at least you're not putting the onus on the industry to collect and scan all that data.
Well, I just thought, they've got the data in systems versus hand scanning, I would suspect, but I just thought the oligarchic nature of the industry was a bit of a red herring. In other words, the real issue is, what data are you capturing? Not that a small amount of people who own a large share of data are reporting it to you, because that should be good. In other words, if it was done right, you've got a much bigger base of data. Isn't that more like the case, right?
My big, as a scientist, my concern is the raw data. I'd love to see it. I mean, that's when you'll know, because like your e-commerce situation, the data they get is accurate, but it's a very small picture of what's actually is going on. And that's what we've been arguing with StatsCan all the time, like for 5 years. We do believe that they only capture a very minuscule part of what's actually going on, which is why consumers are looking at the CPI, scratching their heads. This is not what I'm it doesn't make sense. The inflation rate is not at 2.7% or 3.9%. We're seeing major hikes in a grocery store.
Well, fascinating. So, it sounds like there's a lot going on under the surface. Stats Canada is certainly paying more attention now than they had.
I must say,
5 years
I'm
ago.
very, very pleased with what's going on. I mean, I must say, I really commend StatsCan for reaching out to us. We're meeting with them in November. They'll be meeting with Melanie as well. I suspect in November as well. And so their doors are open, which is really not something I saw before, to be honest. And I know that your experience, Michael, has somewhat been the same, I guess. It's been very difficult to have access to them, eh?
Yeah, but with a little perseverance,
eventually,
a little perseverance, and
you went to StatsCan, right?
That's right. I went to Tunney's Pasture in Ottawa.
But when you go there, you immediately see how Dilbert came about. I mean, that's basically cubicle kingdom.
Well, it's no surprise it's no shock that my friends at Superette Retail Cannabis Store opened up a cannabis store just around the block. That was that's the location they picked as their first store. Ba-doom boom.
Ba-doom boom. But I mean, you went to StatsCan, and with your perseverance, you were able to meet with them. They came to us.
That's great.
Which is great, you know?
Yeah, that's great.